Hey everybody, welcome to A Dash of Cyber. We are here for episode 3. And with me are the crew, and we actually have a special guest today, which is Eran Orzel. He is actually from Argon, which he's actually going to talk a little bit more about what his role and what he does. So we actually, we have a lot to actually cover today. So I actually want to kind of jump right in. So what I'm going to do is let's go right around the table. So what I'll do is I will save the guest for last. So I'm going to go right from my top right there and go to Alexandre. If you want to actually just introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do, and who you work for, you whatever you want.
Yeah. So
Keep it clean.
Clean. VCISO at VARs, RCGT. I help customers with their cybersecurity posture. Despite the fact that I don't like cloud, I still give advice, on enhancing the security on it and all the best practices that we can apply to avoid data leaks. And that's it.
Beautiful data. There's nothing leaks, man. What are you talking about? Yeah, Rod, go ahead.
Rod Lewis, founder of the OK Network. We do a lot of work helping companies with their security posture. So really looking at their structure from the top down, working with the C-level executives to understand the importance of security, getting the budgets right, and really getting the strategy from an organization standpoint correct before you get into implementing anything. So that's where we spend all of our time.
Awesome. Okay, Brad, take it away.
Sure. I am Brad Rhodes. I am the head of cybersecurity at Zavilo in Greenwood Village, Colorado. And then in my other life, I do the cyber warfare officer thing in the U.S. Army National Guard. And we just finished one of our major cyber defense exercises, which was a lot of fun. And we got to bring in some of the latest, greatest, like the print vulnerability from Microsoft. We actually dropped that on our blue teams, and they didn't quite know what to do with it. So it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Okay, and then our special guest today, we're actually bringing in from Argon. So, Eran, take it away.
Hi, guys. I'm Eran. I'm the Chief Revenue and Customer Officer at Argon. What we do is basically providing software supply chain security, making sure our customers can really deliver software in a very secure way and ensure the outcomes of this development process. And we'll talk about it later on the show.
Awesome. So if everybody doesn't quite know why we're here today, so our last show we talked about ransomware, which that's always that's a bad word no matter what you're doing. So one of the things we wanted to go over today is supply chain. And we're going to talk about and provide you with not just talking about, as we always do. We don't want to talk about just, okay, here's what's going to go wrong, and we kind of leave you there. So we're going to give you, here's some risks that we need to talk about, and here's actually some things that you can take away that you can add value to your business, your organization, so that you can actually mitigate these risks, so that you can actually come out the other side better than you went in. So that's what we're here today. So what I want to start with is we're going to try to get through 8 points today. So the first point that we're going to bring up here is, it actually isn't the first point, but I'm going to add it anyway, because we want to actually talk about, that people don't know they actually have a supply chain, or that you're affected by a supply chain. So I'm going to hand this run right over to start to Brad, because you thought it up.
Well, again, it's I always say, so supply chains, everybody's got them, right? You have a supply chain. Again, a question I ask folks: do you have a smartphone? Answer, likely yes. Well, do you get updates for your smartphone? Well, hopefully you update your smartphone. If you don't, well, that's another conversation. But you update your smartphone, and you're trusting that vendor, whether it's say it's a Samsung, pick a provider, Verizon, AT&T, whoever, you're trusting that they're supplying you with good updates that aren't going to either break your phones or make your phones less secure than they are, whatever the case may be. But you're trusting that. So you personally have a supply chain, and organizations have supply chains. Now they're different, but it's the same concept. And when you think about the supply chain, we have to ask ourselves some questions. And as Ron mentioned, right, it's about the risk posture and asking that question. So you got to discover your supply chains, and you got to ask questions. You got to say, who are my vendors? Right? Who are they? Right? You might even have vendors out there that you didn't even know. That, of course, that never happens, right? Well, it totally happens. Sometimes you bought something that you have on contract for 5 years, and all of a sudden you get a call from somebody that says, hey, we've been supplying this to you, and we want to renew the contract. And you're like, I didn't know that we had that. But then the second thing you have to do is you want to ask questions of those vendors. You need to know, who are your vendors' vendors? If you don't know who your vendors are, you're blind in the supply chain. And supply chains are incredibly complex today. And that's something we really need to consider.
Yeah. Now, if we talk about something like trust, when we talk about trusting your vendor, is that almost like an implicit trust, an explicit trust? I think in some cases it might even be a little bit of both, because, I may trust vendor A, who is my direct, let's say, one level down that I know and I work with you. You're my MSP doing, and then it's also, like you said, it's their vendor of their vendor of their vendor's vendor. There's a lot of vendoring going on here. So,
yes.
You're basically implicitly trusting. And I think, we're in a world now where we talk about zero trust, where you don't actually trust even your vendor. And it's all about verification. So I think, it's a great point that, you have to understand your supply chain, and you have to actually dig deep and go down through that rabbit hole and see how many people are actually involved and how many hands are in the pot when it comes to servicing your company. And maybe Alexandre, if you want to, what do you think?
Yeah, and also we also are the supplier of many people, even if we don't think about, we release software, we provide services, so we are a supplier. And when we collect data, we invoice, and this data we store it somewhere, which is also another supply chain. So do we do due care ourselves, and do we apply the same care to our process that we would expect to our providers? And there's a legal standpoint on that. I mean, this is a term and condition. We're going to speak about it later on. But do we read that all? When you did sign for your mobile phone contract, as Brad was speaking about, did you read all the little lines, between the resignation cost, the engagement, anything like that? So, I mean, usually if you are in business, SMBs and bigger, you have like the legal department that will back you up before signing anything. So that's one point. And the second point, you did inspire me in that, we usually say that if you don't know what you have, you cannot protect it. So the inventory of supplier is also a key factor, because if you remember this scam with you receive mail about the domain name renewal, and you will sign, it will actually take a transfer order from your internet domain to another provider. So that was a early days supply chain attack through mail.
Yeah.
So, and if you don't know who's your provider, and if the accounting is not aware, doesn't have any way to verify the integrity of it, they could fall for it. It's CEO fraud and all of that. It's after all a supply chain hijack in a way. So this is a very complex and wide attack surface thing.
Okay. Now, one thing, if we talk about now, I'm going to jump right into actually this question here, just because, what you were talking about is that everybody is a vendor. At some point, you seem to always, we kind of talk at them as they're the other people, they're the other guys. But in fact, we're all vendors of some sort. We're, regardless of what we do, even from a personal perspective, we always help or provide something to somebody. So we are, it's almost like a recursive loop, where you actually might even go down enough, where you go around the circle enough, you actually come back to, wait a minute, to myself, like, what's going on? I don't even trust myself now, which is probably a good thing. But if we talk about third-party software providers, so, in terms of, because I think, with what we do, like Alexandre, Rod, Eran, I'll actually lead this with you as well. I mean, you're a third-party software provider. As well, right? You provide software and technology and tools. Now, if we talk about how do you handle and inside from Argon, because you're here to protect supply chains, but you of course also are a vendor and a part of a supply chain. So how do you actually balance that?
So I think today it's part of every organization to really make sure that these vendors have a certain level of security in their processes, in the way they run their business. So I know that, for example, when we talk with customer, they do some validity checks on us, like SOC 2, like other forms, and verify that we have a proper security to meet their policies and benchmarks. And I think this is crucial today, because everyone is using software, and you need at least to have a baseline verifying that your suppliers have the basic security to protect the data that you share with them. And if you give them access to your application, this is even more extreme than that.
Cool. What do you think, Rod? I mean, you're in the business of providing software and services.
Yeah, it's Trustful Verify, right? So I think Eran touched on it. It's not offensive to say to a supplier, let me see your processes. Let me see how your processes work and the outputs of your processes. How do you audit your processes, right? Because you're trusting them with your company, right? So you shouldn't be afraid to say to a supplier, like if Eran's doing business with us, let me see how you run your organization, right? SOC 2 is just, it's a methodology, and yes, it's auditable, etc. But let me see the output of it. Let me see your reporting structures. Let me see how you alert. Let me see how you triage. Let me see how you deal with disasters, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm reliant on you. And if you fall down, then I perhaps fall down. And so it's asking questions. It's in the past we kind of relied on legalese, right? So liability is covered because we signed a contract, and if anything goes wrong, we've got SLAs and we've got clawbacks and everything else. But we're at a point where the bad guys are coming through that, and no amount of SLAs are going to matter if your company's in the dirt. So it really comes down to you won't be. I mean, to audit every one of your suppliers is tough. But ask some hard questions to at least crack the surface and see if they're at least doing things properly, will get you a long way.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense.
And I like the idea of flipping that. Verify, then trust, and then I'll put in parentheses, maybe, right? Because again, that verification process, right, starts, right? And I think you hit a key point, right? You're not asking to see the secret sauce, right? You want to understand the outputs, right? And how, if you're going to provide data to a certain organization, is it going to be secure? And where I sit, I see a lot more of those questions being asked, of our potential customers. They'll come to us and say, okay, well, how do you do this thing? And we okay, then we do this and this and this, and this is how we maintain security, not only for ourselves, but ultimately for you as one of our customers. So I think that you're going to see more and more of those questions over time.
Okay, so it's not like DPI on the vendor. It's almost like the metadata. Where you want to kind of take a look and see how you're all connected in the web. You want to kind of understand the web of vendors that are going on, which is, I think, important. And these shouldn't be hard questions to answer. I mean, I think when it comes up, so like we always want to do, we want to kind of give people something that they can take away. So so if I start with, I'll start with you, Alexandre. What is one question that people can ask to actually understand who their third-party vendors are? What's a question that you would ask?
Well, looking for the inventory of sub-provider and contractor, and asking where the asset and data is going. What data they collect, where is it going, and who process it. So that's it's like a GDPR kind of approach, but that's your asset. When you subscribe to anything with someone, you want to know where it's going and why they use it for. So. And regulation cover that, but you want a practical view on that. And the key point is, it depends how far you want to go, because your provider might have a proper policy and governance, but if they subcontract to a cloud provider, they are in charge of transferring the whole thing. We're going to speak about that later. But did they actually follow the due diligence of taking all the impactful article of term and condition to you? So that's one thing from the legal standpoint. And the second point that actually Eran is bringing with our Argon, it's a good thing, because we speak about CICD and DevOps. That's the second side of things, automation, building tools and software, and supply chain. Because today, like supply chain in our world, it's mostly software. And what we see today is a lot of automation, cloud, a lot of availability, scalability, and automation in the infrastructure. And one of the key points that I see today is, infrastructure as code. So basically, DevOps design the architecture of the platform and grow it as needed to face the load. So the impact is huge, because the whole infrastructure and the whole cost is tied to that. Beside of the data issue, privacy issue, there is also a cost and operation issue. And if you do not verify and check the integrity of your DevOps cycle and the CI/CD pipelines, then you have no idea what's going to happen on your side, on your own infrastructure. But if you distribute software and build, you have an auto-build process and you distribute software. We saw that with Solarwinds and many others. Then it's a huge risk for everybody. So today, verifying what you pull from a repository and push into your code must require an integrity and security validation. And that's the due care. There is the due diligence. We were speaking about that a little bit before. The due diligence is going to make sure that your provider have proper process, documentation, and everything is well done. And then you have the due care, which is an ongoing verification, making sure that the process cannot be hijacked to inject anything bad into it.
Cool.
That's fully important.
Awesome. I think, and I mean, that perfectly leads into our second question. So I'm going to bring this up here because, this is, one of the main reasons we really wanted Eran to come on the show today is to really talk about, CICD and protecting the actual code and the pipeline and the architecture, the infrastructure, everything like that. Because, I mean, I've been a developer for over 30 years, and I can tell you when I go and I try to create a piece of software today, and I need to use a module, and I do something like npm install. I mean, I am completely in awe, probably scared awe that, okay, it just installed 150 packages because just to put a little checkbox on a form somewhere, to say that I'm going to go in there and manually audit every single piece of code and line of code in 150 packages is not happening. So either we build it all from scratch ourselves, and that still doesn't guarantee anything because you still have to keep eyeballs on on all that code anyway. So I think it's so important that we need to have automation tools to actually keep an eye as a governing overseer, and so to speak, again with trust and verification. So I want to definitely hear from Eran in terms of what Argon does, what you do, and what your suggestions and value add here for this piece is.
Okay, so I'll just take supply chain into software supply chain, and this is basically the process where you write and store the code. This is the first stage. The second step is basically building the code or building the application, and here where you get all the dependencies like open source packages and container and everything tied together and compile it, and at the end the deployment stage. So in these three stages, this is basically the software supply chain that based on the survey that we did, 90% of the organization have automation on that. So every company that develops software today, 90% of them have automated software supply chain. And I think when you look at those environments, the two things that really jumped at you is the high complexity of those environments, the dynamic nature of them, they're ever changing, and the last thing is the low security measures that apply on them. Now, a software supply chain attack is basically when attackers are trying to target less secure elements in your process to enter to your supply chain and then get hold of it or your code and use it. Now, I think today attackers understood that this is a very weak process in the organization, and by getting into that environment, they can use it to distribute their malware, like you've seen the Kesaya example or the Solarwinds, and create big impact on what they want to see. Now, if you look at what happened in the last 6 months, basically there were tens of millions of dollars in damages caused by the last few attacks. And are you still there? You all disappeared on me.
I think we just changed the view a bit. Yeah.
Wow.
That's spotlighting. He gave you the spotlight.
No, it's okay. You get the
spotlight.
I put you right on main stage. It was good. I had to just.
I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, it's okay. So going back to that, we're all ignoring that, but if you look at the amount of damage that those attacks like Solarwinds, Kotkov, and Kesaya just inflicted on thousands of customers, this is a huge thing. And I participated in the Cyber Week event just last week in Tel Aviv, and there were 4 major trends that were keep coming up. And it was ransomware attack, cloud transformation, the impact of COVID, and software supply chain attacks. So people are starting to notice that and understand the severity and of the damage that they can inflict those types of attacks. Now, going back to the second part of the question of how Argon can help. So when we look today and analyze the attack vectors, we see like three things that you need to pay attention to. First is the CICD pipeline tools, the GitHub, the GitLabs, the Jenkins builders. Those are very good tools, but they lack security and they are vulnerable, and there's tons of misconfiguration and mistakes that people can do. And this is exactly what the attackers are using to penetrate the pipeline and inflict damage. And we see Solarwinds, Mercedes, Nissan, and others losing code and getting those attacks. The other vector that is as important is the pipeline dependencies, and there are like two parts of it. The first one is basically the services that connect to the pipeline, and we see attacks like the CodeCov attacks or the Atlassian weaknesses that were released, where attackers can take advantage of those services that connect to your pipeline and part of your process, and through that get access to your pipeline. And the last thing is what you mentioned, Ron, is the packages. And every software today, 90% of them use like tons of open source packages that are being reused, tons of vulnerabilities in them. Also the containers that are that software is being deployed on. And this is basically the third vendor. And our, I think, role here is to create the awareness and make sure that software supply chain is top of mind for CISOs and their security teams when they are building their plans and budget, in order to really enable them to stop those attacks. Because when it's, you don't do it, and when it happened, it's really difficult to see that, to identify them, and it can really impact your organization. So I think as a company that provides services in this area, although there is high awareness, it takes time to transition from awareness to, hey, I'm deploying security, and sometimes it's too late, and those are only the attacks we know about. I'm sure that there are hundreds of breaches and attacks that nobody is talking about, and those are the ones that worries me. And we just connected a couple of months ago to a customer, and the first thing that pop up is that he's running the compromised version of CodeCov, meaning every CI run, all the system variable secrets, everything is being published to the attacker servers. And as a company, we believe that that our customer will continue to move to the cloud in an accelerating pace, that DevOps processes and automation is going to continue to increase, and this is the way to ship software these days. You're not, I even see the old company that are still like not using the CD part and the continuous deployment, starting to think about it and move to the cloud. And our mission is to continue to support our customer in this journey to the cloud, support the DevOps revolution, but make sure that we add the security layer in it. And the way that we are doing it basically today is help them by integrating to their CICD tools and provide them visibility and insight on what's going on, because visibility is the key issue. If you don't know what's going on there, you will never be able to protect it.
Yeah.
The second layer is basically enforcing DevOps and security best practices on the pipeline process, making sure that you are able to build a baseline and a policy that is adequate to the software that you release, and get your customer trust in your updates. And once you have that, I think that you're in a level that you're not risking your own customers. And this is where you want to be, to protect your brand, to protect your business. And we are not there yet. So this is our mission, and it's going to be a long way until we get the customer to get there.
But I think
that's right. I mean, they say Rome wasn't built in a day, and security isn't solved in a day either, right? So we need to make sure that take one step at a time. So I think I'm going to move us on to, and thank you very much for that, Eran. That was amazing, very in depth.
Just one thing though, because we tend to talk about automation and DevOps, and we don't peel back a bit. And I think what people don't realize is the complexity underneath the hood. And it's easy to say DevOps, but there's a bazillion tools. They don't conform to IAM standards. They have different logins. When people leave the organization, there's lots of shrapnel. There's a lot of nastiness under the hood that needs to be cleaned up. And we really need to talk. We talk about automation as a holy grail, and we talk about CICD as it's this neat thing that just works. And people don't see that underneath, there's like 1,000 hamsters and 1,000 ways in, right? And 1,000 dependencies, whether it's GitHub, you're pulling packages. There's just so many dependencies, but it's easy to say, yeah, we automated it. And I think we have to get away from that so people can understand that with that complexity comes security issues. And if you don't do that and you just think about pushing quick, let's deploy. Yeah, we can deploy in 2 seconds. That's great. You pull Docker packages that are corrupted, right?
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, well, I think, I think the business operations, aren't always aligned with security. I think, that they don't necessarily are talking, and, it's always, let's get this out to market as quick as possible so that we can bank on whatever is current and happening today. And of course, that's a business operation, and that's something that's driven by, CEOs and everybody sitting down to say, how are we going to seize this, our share of the market? Yeah. And, security doesn't necessarily, that may not factor in, but I think today, we always talk about how do we make people think of security as something that is a value add, and how can they not today? You see what's happening out there. We're not talking about a little hack here and a little bit of ransom there. We are talking about, I would say, we're talking about billions of dollars of loss because security wasn't thought of. And it's going to continue to go worse. I think the forecast is showing by 2025 that we're going to hit the trillion.
Yeah, I think, Ron, you're spot on that. I think that there is no collaboration today between security and development. Security is not high on their list of KPIs. And in many discussions, they don't even bring the security guys. And with lack of visibility, the security just saying, okay, I'm not securing that. I have no visibility. I don't know even what tools they are using. Are they using GitHub, GitLab? I have no visibility, no knowledge. Let them do their own and I'll protect the door. But the window is open. People are coming in. So
no worry. No worry. It's going to be closed source. No one is going to see it.
So I want to kind of jump into number 3 here, just because I know one thing, Eran, I think you must be almost midnight there for you.
It's it's only 10:30. We're working.
Only okay. No problem. So I'm gonna keep moving along here. So we want to talk about another risk point is the website builders. So we want to built and deployed by third parties. And I think that's actually a very key point that we brought up here is that people don't really build their own websites anymore. They usually have automated packages. They might drop something from WordPress, which of course that we know that is wrought with a lot of security vulnerabilities over time, which makes sense because it's so widely used. It's not like it's that wasn't their intent, obviously. It's just that it is a very lucrative, high ROI platform to attack. So when we talk about website builders, built, deployed by third parties, who would like to field this? Brad, you want to kind of start us on this one and
sure
talk about those risks?
This is obviously, again, it goes back to whether you're verifying and trusting. And so there's sort of 2 schools of thought here. If you build your own website and you connect it to a database backend and you screw that up, you own the 0 day, right? So what people do is they defer that. They go, well, I'm just going to use this website builder. I'm going to do it in WordPress and stuff like that. And they roll out a WordPress site or whatever they decide to use. And because these things are so complex, right? They don't think to, deploy a, like say WordFence or some other tool or firewall in front of it, right? They don't think to do that stuff. They just assume it's going to work. And then because it's so complex, there's misconfigurations like we always see in these things. And Alexander will tell you there's, misconfigurations all over the cloud, right? We see, another breach of a WordPress site or some cloud-based asset or something like that, right? It's usually not because somebody, some Uber hacker drove a Mack truck through the front door of some vulnerability. It's usually because there's a misconfiguration. They didn't lock down the includes portion or the files portion or whatever. It's akin to a directory traversal today, and just finding an exposed site like that and dropping your malware there, your droppers are hanging out there, and using that as free infrastructure for your attack from an attacker perspective. And so, again, you got to know what you're getting into, right? You need to know when you think about the tools and questions you want to ask out of this, before you even decide you're going to do that, you got to say, what am I responsible for, right? Am I responsible for configuring and securing? And the answer is 9 times out of 10, yes, you are, right? Because those companies don't want that liability, so they defer it to you. And so you have to understand that before you blindly say. And again, as we noted before, the agreements for these things are incredibly complex, right? I dare you to read one, right, in the course of an evening and not fall asleep, right? You're going to get through like 3 lines. You're going to pass out. I'm like, go on, because nobody wants to read that, and so we just accept and we just trust that that's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, somebody calls us and says, "Hey, did you know that your site was hosting, X malware family?" And you're like, "What's going on here?" And so, we have to be really careful with that, and we've got to again really dig into the details of our levels of responsibility there, so that again, we need to know the bottom line. We're likely responsible for any of those misconfigurations.
Yeah. I mean, you can't pass the buck. I mean, I think that's the whole idea, right? We're passing the buck to say, let's just go and click this link. It downloads, it installs WordPress, it installs a payment e-commerce solution for us. And I think that's now one thing we should mention here is, okay, so we took that route, because we just don't have the team. I mean, we have to accept that, if I want to start up my small business, I don't have the resources or the knowledge to actually create my own site. So I'm going to have to go and go to GoDaddy and say, okay, I'm going to do the website builder. I'm going to grab this and I'm going to start with it. So how do we check these? How do we know, and how do we keep eyes on? I think this might even come back to Eran a bit, and Rod, maybe I'll let you jump in first here too, as well, to say, what do we put in place to check these sites that we've decided to just one-click install that can basically one-click of doom if they're not maintained and monitored?
Yeah, I think a couple things at play. WordPress is an example, because of the kind of the huge plugin libraries available. It becomes easier and easier to compromise yourself by going for the latest and greatest plugin, right? So it really, when it comes down to it, even if you don't understand the system, at least having a second set of eyes review what you're doing with the system. And if you can't afford to hire a professional, then having 2 people sign off, right? So instead of having one person own the website, and using WordPress as an example, and they decide they want to get a straw man poll or whatever, they go find a plugin and they don't look at it, they don't know who it's from, they don't do their due diligence, and you're going to hear that over and over again. They just load it into the site, and now your site is compromised because it came from a third party who's malicious, right? So at least having 2 people make that decision, at least create some level of accountability and some thought process, versus one person who owns it, happens to be a junior and is just looking for the latest flashy stuff. It's probably for the folks who don't have the wherewithal, it's probably one of the best ways to do it. If you can afford to have somebody who has the skill set to kind of review stuff, and pen test your website and excuse me, look for exploits, it's what you should be doing, especially if you're using something like WordPress. And then maintain if it's not hosted by WordPress themselves, maintain your patch, continually, right? Like, you got WordPress, you got a patch, you got to keep up with it. If you don't, you're going to end up exploited. So that's kind of the first point. But if you outsource your website to an agency, it comes down to what we talked about before, right? Is know who your agency suppliers are, know what their processes are, right? Know what their security posture is. If they can't spell security, then you shouldn't be outsourcing your site to them, right? So it's asking the right questions before you hand something that's core to your business over to somebody. And that would be kind of the ways I would look at it to mitigate any potential exposure.
Yeah, cool. Alex,
Yes.
I mean, because of, you provide software and you kind of go and look at this and make that kind of holistic outlook to say, what do we do and how do we get tools to automate and kind of look at this? I mean, what would you suggest in terms of what would people look for? I mean, we have Argon, of course. I mean, Argon's products and services can actually look after this and monitor this for you. But, from another generic perspective, what do we do in terms of what do we get? What's out there? Source code analysis. I mean, what are we looking for to say, let's keep these assets and these resources, visibility and secured?
So, well, you should know what you have and where it is. And I like some tools. I don't know if you know that site, sucuri.net, SUCURI.net. It's a website that allows you to check the security of your website from an external standpoint. It's not like a pen test. It's just like you check, you put your site, and it's going to spot stuff. Many times, I saw website that had, hijack on cross-scripting or JavaScript injected in their stuff that got seen by that website. So it's after the CICD process, so it's just, after the development is done, but it's allowing unskilled people to keep an eye on their stuff with an external monitoring tool. So that's one thing. Second point, you spoke about WordPress, but any website development, relying on too many external resources is also a big exposure and risk. I mean, there is a trend in development thing on the online resource that embed everything by linking to external resource. And to me, that's an issue because you place your entire security relying on the fact that the third party is going to protect the integrity of that file. But if you have like 1 million website loading one JavaScript from one place and you corrupt that JavaScript, this is still a supply chain attack. It's going to break all the website. So as a best practice on my side, I like to, check out the script, host it myself. And if there is an update, then sync it up again in a CI/CD process that can actually help you verify the thing. Because now this trend of linking everything outside is really scary because you end up having more than 100 different providers for one single website. So how do you assess the security of that? How do you practice due care on that? You just can't.
Yeah, especially when it's a CDN, right? I mean, the problem with CDNs is that, it's the actual client on the end user that's actually downloading the file on their machine. That is actually beyond your ability to protect your own customers at that point, because you're saying to them, here's a link to a JavaScript that's actually on Google's site, and it goes directly to their computer. I mean, that's the whole idea with the with the load balancing and providing reliability and scalability throughout the world. CDNs made that obviously easier and more possible. But the fact is you now saying, hey, customer and user, here's a script that you're going to download, whether it's safe or not, that's your problem.
Yeah, and the user is not even aware. Just load a web page. They don't see the browser picking all the stuff unless you look at the network load. And the second impact is like the brand impact if your website is corrupted by a third party, and the ranking impact as well on the SEO side of things. If you get malware on your stuff, just fall down on your reputation, and the SEO is going to just blow out. So that's something where security is also business value. Like if you lose that, you lose business.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to jump into our number 4. So I mean, and this really ties in well. I mean, it leads right into the third-party data stores because we're still talking third-party at this point. So and now who wants to field this one? I'll take a volunteer on this one. Okay, I'm gonna pick somebody.
This one's loaded though, Ra. This one's totally loaded because everybody's got third-party data stores, right? It's like back to the fact that everybody's got a supply chain. Everybody has a third-party data store, right? If let's say you've got a Facebook, right? So, and again, truth in advertising, I have a Facebook to keep up with family stuff, right? But it's a data store, right? It's a day. Yeah, I'm getting down there. I'll say, trust me, it's like between that and LinkedIn, that's all I got, right? Because I got to keep up with you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So, but again, LinkedIn, it's a data store. And you see, it's hilarious to me when you see it is, right? But it's like when you see, I love what was it? I was 3 months ago, where they said, oh my gosh, 600 million users' data was air quotes stolen from LinkedIn. And you're like, no, it's whatever you make publicly accessible on LinkedIn is publicly scrapable, as is every single website. But it's a freaking data store. It's a data store, right? So you again, it goes back to this inherent thing that we put a trust in somebody that they're going to keep our stuff secure, and you don't necessarily know what the guarantees of that are unless there's a direct contract, right? It's back to that versus that implicit, that implicit versus explicit type stuff, right? Is it an explicit contract, right, that you have with an organization, or is it implicit, right? And a lot of times, right, there's those third-party data stores that you don't even know about in your supply chain that people are storing your data in, and you've got to ask yourselves those questions. Who, in the data stores itself, it's like, who has access to that data? right? That's like a basic question.
Yeah.
Because if your provider or your vendor that you're buying from can't answer that question, one, you've busted GDPR, right? And two, right, you're probably up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah, and it's hard to even verify that because the thing is, I mean, and I know Alex and I talk about it in a group that we're in there with a few buddies, is that you don't control L2, you don't actually control on the cloud, you control nothing. So I mean, all you have is, and we're going to talk about this if we have time, is TNCs. Is all you have to go by is saying, okay, so you're not reading and looking at or using my data, but of course, if you look at their TNCs, somebody like Google is going into your Gmail account, reading your emails and showing you ads based off of the emails you're getting. So
and people think that's magic. People think that's magic, right? And seriously, I mean, again, and this is one of those things. It's like I actually do a like a course where I help senior citizens understand how the internet works, right, and help to protect them and make them better. And I've literally had to. I've drawn the picture for them that says, look, they're like, it's just magic, and I go, no, it's standards, right? If you because you signed a EULA. Right, with Google, when you signed up for it, that said they're going to be able to mine your data, one, so they can do their own trending and stuff like that, and so that they can sell you stuff, so they can put the right ad in front of you that you're going to click on, right, so that they can generate that ad traffic, and drive that revenue, the revenue. And so there's no magic here, right? But again, if you got Gmail, right, it's a data store, right? Everything out there, you can everything we talked about today is something that you may never have thought of it that way, but you should think of it that way and understand the risk inherent to putting stuff in any data store.
Yeah. Actually, let's talk about this because I think this is an interesting one. Is when we talk about, and I brought this up on actually many shows and other podcasts. Is I talk about static data versus dynamic data. We talk about PII and your birth date and all this, and I always tell people that it's important to protect that information, but it actually doesn't have as high a value as you think. The data that you're doing right now, when you're clicking, scrolling, viewing this and loading in your car, going down the road with your map application open, is actually dynamic data that actually generates revenue for somebody on the spot. That data is actually way, way, way more important than the static data. Okay, we should know your birthday, and people talk about secret questions. You know what? I don't even get asked for secret questions anymore to get back into my account. They don't even do that most sites anymore. It's that actual dynamic data you don't see that you've opted in without even realizing it, because we're actually in an opt-out world, not an opt-in world. And we're still, and hopefully that change is coming. So I think that's something to be important, that you're right, everything is a data store. I think there's a statistic out there that I saw last year or the year before that said we've collected more data in the last 5 years and stored it than we have collected in the last 30 or 40 years. Yeah, it's that high.
Because the points of telemetry are large now. The telemetry points are huge. Whether it's your phone, it's your ad presence, it's your email presence, like just the points of telemetry on human beings is through the roof now. And so the data is becoming exponential.
True. And I could see that this morning. I took my son for a COVID test stuff. And I didn't, set that information anywhere. I took Waze and I put the address on the street and, to the COVID testing center. And the Waze ads that pop up is like, we hope you're going to feel good. We support you in your effort for the COVID stuff. Damn crap, There is a sushi shop right to the next block, I could just park to the sushi shop. And so it's like, these guys are really fast, So thankfully tests come quickly negative and all is good, but that's the point. I felt like, data, damn it. Just an address.
And it's hard to escape it. And even if you think about you can escape, I'm just going to turn that off or turn that off. Okay, well, that's within your immediate first level control. But you can't turn off the Ring camera that's across the street that's looking at you leave your house every day. You can't turn off. You're being collected and looked at and studied and investigated. Okay, well, we know what he does at night in his neighborhood.
Well, that's what they were talking about with the Clubhouse leak, right? The Clubhouse leak, they're saying they could have your data even if you weren't a Clubhouse user because somebody synced their contacts, and I happen to be in their contacts that they synced. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's so much out of your control. We have some, we have the ability to protect some of what's in our control, but there's so much, I think, it's almost like the iceberg pictures where they show that there's a little bit of tip above the water, and there's like basically 70% under the water. And I think that's what we're looking at when it comes to data privacy and data security, is that literally we only have like 10% control over what we actually
it's less than that.
do anything about. Yeah, it's probably way less.
Yeah.
And then everything under the hood we have no visibility or control about, and it's nothing we can do about it other than, well, I guess go live in the woods, and hopefully that squirrel doesn't tell the other squirrel.
Well, we can try to limit what we share, but there's another situation when we speak about supply chain, term and condition, but there is also merge and acquisition. You actually sign an agreement with a provider, and that provider got purchased by a bigger company. So usually you see that in the news, but you didn't get notification, or you just get a mail that say, "Hey, we now part of the family of blah blah blah." But that should trigger a huge warning on the legal counsel of the organization, because that's changing everything in regard to the contract, the owner of the data, where it's going, the infrastructure, and all. So supply chain, it's requiring like watching, like you watch the market. You must watch your provider changes to make sure that you are still compliant with your expectation, at least. I'm not even speaking about compliance or legal requirements or regulation, just compliant with what you expect. So merge and acquisition in the technology world, it's happening a lot. So that's something. And I saw Ron pull the title on IoT. Ooh, Internet of Threat, right there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a scary one. I mean, we were talking about that 4 was a big one. 5 is, I think we're opening up a can of worms here. I mean, the thing is that when I look at something like that, I approach that from, what the heck can anybody even do about this kind of situation? Like, we know this is a huge risk. IoT is something that security wasn't even an afterthought of an afterthought of an afterthought. It's just, let's get these things out. There's billions of these devices out there. And then we're talking about pre-installed malware. Now, people are going to say, what do you mean pre-installed malware? Yeah, we're finding out that they are leaving the factory with malware inside them. Now, I think what I'd like to do is actually hit, if you want, Eran, is when we're looking at something like this, because malware is software, they're installed on devices, which is, of course, operating system and software. Now, running something like Argon and having that actually in the shops that are creating these devices, I mean, that seems to be like a no-brainer to me, because we have to get it right at the source. There has to be something that's watching this at the source before these devices leave the factory. It's like, if I look at an example from back in my days when I was making video games, I was making Game Boy games. If we had a bug on a ROM, I mean, we can't issue a patch for that. So, this is a very complex thing. If you get something in firmware that's right at the very nature closest you can to the hardware, that goes out of the factory and you miss it, it's a bad day for a lot of people. So what do you think from your perspective, from what you do? How do we get eyes on that?
I think that what you just ask is the basic of software supply chain attack. Those let's take an example of hardware manufacturer. The main focus is the hardware, and basically there is a small group of people that are going to update the firmware and release it, and they will send it to the company that will combine everything together and run it. Nobody today is even checking the malware, that it's if there is malware there, if the code is okay. And I think the key thing today, when everything is software run and we're moving to automation, and those IoT devices are everywhere. And if you think about it, every company today have like cameras in the offices. People talk to them, connecting like printers and microphones and tons of devices that are never used to be there before. So, and this is a blind trust. I go to the office, I take like a camera, I connect it, and now I have a better camera connected. But the drivers on this camera, who checks them? It's automatically getting into my laptop, and I click on that, and I trust it blindly. So this is, again, going back to the manufacturer. This is your duty to make sure that everything that you ship out is safe for the user to use. And like if you have a mobile phone and you sell it to something, and the minute I use it, it will explode in my face. This is your this is your responsibility. The same thing is if the minute I use it, someone take all my data, all my things, and steal it and take it away, this is also your responsibility. So I think this is part of the revolution that we need to, help companies to adopt. That software is everywhere. It's in anything that we are touching today, and we need to make sure that the software is secure as much as we can, because it might be a camera today, but it can be something that will be installed in a nuclear factory, and then there is like a huge damage that
or medical device or whatever.
Actually, I like how you said that. It's a camera today, but you could actually expand on that thought, because a camera isn't always a camera. A cable isn't always a cable. Look at that cable that was put out. And actually, I actually broke that story a couple of years ago, and people actually told me I thought I lost my marbles. I told them, I said, there's a cable that's coming out of China right now that actually has a Wi-Fi or transceiver built into the cord. And actually, somebody actually reported me saying that I'm making lies, that is not possible. And what do we find that comes out actually a couple of weeks later is a cable on the market with a Wi-Fi transceiver. So a cable isn't always a cable. It isn't always what it seems. And I think that's the whole idea of security and attacks and hacking, is that the idea is to actually make it so that what we see is not what we get. There's actually something else going on behind the scenes. So even this IoT it may be a camera, but what if it actually has something that was introduced at the factory level? And I actually remember I was talking with a company not long ago where they actually came up with a technology that could actually scan an X-ray circuitry. They were finding that people are actually infiltrating manufacturing plants and actually updating the IC and everything and actually adjusting the circuit. So they actually say, here's a chip that actually is compromised, and here's one that isn't, and you actually have to X-ray it to see, and actually the malware is built into the hardware. And so, we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of scary stuff out there.
But I think on the IoT thing, you also, especially the cameras and stuff, they all like to store data in the cloud. And it comes back to, where's your data being stored, how's it being secured, et cetera, right? Because they all want a phone home, they all talk to the cloud, and a lot of it's not encrypted. And so you're ending up with your stuff just sitting out there we talked about buckets. It's sitting in a bucket.
Leaky bucket. So, IoT is going to be a huge, it already is a huge issue.
I love buckets. I'm going to browse people data, IoT data. It's amazing. Yeah, CubeOS is a great way to isolate. I was speaking about how to protect yourself from different attacks like IoT or device that are corrupted. If you have proper isolation on the system side, like CubeOS is an operating system that isolates every step and every process from each other. So basically, if you plug something corrupted, it's not going to corrupt any environment that you didn't grant access to. So that's a good approach. And in regard to home people, we spoke about that last time. If you get IoT, you should just place them on a dedicated network if you can. Just, easy way, have a Wi-Fi access point dedicated to them that does not communicate with the rest. That's the most simple way to get some protection. If you decide to get the Ring global surveillance system financing, then you put that on that. If you decide to support the distraction of the NSA agent that listened to Alexa recording, you put that to the other stuff. And I'm on fire. And but
getting sued at the end of this one. Okay.
And if you don't patch your iPhone and you get Israeli company listening to you, sorry. Okay. All right. So what do you say, Ron?
No. Anyway, how's the weather where you guys are? It's, by the way, I support all political parties and.
It's up.
Yeah, I donate to charities. Okay, I do actually. Okay, so moving on, and I think this is a really good one here for number 6. Is that IoT? We could actually do a whole show on IoT.
Yes,
we should actually do a whole show on all of these. And I think this is actually a very good icebreaker anyway to actually go through these points, because these are very large topics, and we talked about. And now I don't think we're going to get to the point of talking about due diligence as its own point. Because we're getting low on time. But I think, we always have to talk about that due diligence is hard. This isn't easy. People throw that word around. People throw words around all over the bloody place and say, oh, do this and, increase your security posture, lower your risk, mitigate your this. These are all easy things to say. In reality, they are not that easy to do. You need help. If you can't do it yourself, you need to go get help. And I think, and of course, I think that point, which I didn't actually mean to do, I must be very clever today, but it leads into MSP, MSSPs, is because if you don't have the skills or the knowledge to do it, then you need to get help. So where do you go? You need to look for a consultant, an MSP, MSSP. Now, we're talking about risks. So you're probably wondering, okay, well, why am I talking about MSPs? Because, well, they can be risks. And we have seen them. We've seen that they are actually exponential risks because they have the keys to the kingdom and to many kingdoms in some cases. We saw not long ago, a couple of years ago, where there was I think it was an aftercare facility that an MSP got compromised, and they were able to compromise something like 70 or 80 old age homes, all their systems. And that used to be really big at the time. We've seen way worse than that since then.
Oh yeah, you don't have to go that far back to say it. Kaseya was an MSP attack. Totally.
Yeah, so I mean, take it away. I mean, Rod, I mean, this is kind of in your realm here. So I mean, what do you think here in terms of how do you lessen the risk? How do you of your own MSP and MSP that you may be using? And I think you should also define those two terms because they're not the same. People, I have been seeing that MSPs are now calling themselves MSSPs, and you can't just do that.
No.
So you can't just throw an S in there and say we're good. I think there needs to be some certification here. But I mean, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so I said you don't have to go that far. Like really, 2 weeks ago, Kaseya was a total MSP attack, right? So they compromised the tool that a lot of MSPs use to actually administrate their customers. So they got a direct pipe into all of the MSPs. All of the MSPs that Kaseya supplied were compromised through that software, right? And so we have a client that was down, and they still are down. They're still rebuilding, and it was all due to their service provider being attacked. And the sad part is, I was telling you guys previously, was not only were the service provider was attacked, the customer was compromised, and the service provider couldn't help the customer because they were compromised. So you were relying on somebody to help you because you couldn't help yourself, or you needed additional hands. And now those additional hands are tied, and you're stuck trying to bail water out of the boat. So, but getting back to your point, what do you do? I mean, it really comes down. We talk about due diligence. Due diligence, if you're looking for an MSP, it doesn't mean you hand the keys over to somebody and say, "Hey, take my car." Like if it's a valet, you don't just go, "Hey, you're a guy that you're standing outside. Take my keys, go park my car." No, you verify that person has this. Like you're gonna ask some questions, right? So the same thing with MSP. Ask the questions, and don't ask just once. Right, it should be periodic reviews, whether they're monthly, quarterly, whatever. You should be talking this. This is a relationship you're building, and you have to trust the person. But you also have to verify, right? Show me how you maintain your security posture. Show me what processes you have in place. Show me what isolation you have that I have from your additional customers. Right? Is your network segmented? Right? Can anybody in the NOC access my network at any point in time, or do they have to go through a gate and open tickets, et cetera, so that there's trackability, there's traceability, right? If they don't have all those things in place and there's just a pipe from their network to my network, I have a problem. You have a problem. So it's asking very specific questions and making sure they have the answers. How do you protect my data? Is it encrypted? Who has access to it? Is it need to no access only? We can create a list between the five of us of things that you should ask. As I said, it's not just a one time. It's a continual. Show me the reports. Show me that you did your audit last month, right? Show me what the results of the audit was. What are your exposures? Are you pen testing yourself? All those things. So it's not a one time, it's a continual relationship evolution, and you have to be on top of it like any relationship. You don't drive your car just into any mechanic and say, fix it. You do some research.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you brought up a good point. And I like how, because we did that, the last show is that, a takeaway to say, what do people ask? Because, if you get a small business, and let's say you're a dentist office, your small office starting out, you hire an MSP to look after your technology. You don't know what to ask them. I mean, we say you should, check this and verify them. Well, what does that mean? If you actually went to a dentist and asked them, verify, they don't know what that means. What do you mean? Do I say, are you a good MSP? Yeah, I am. Okay. I mean,
Best in the world. Best in the world.
How do you check that? I mean, that's the thing is that, and I think that a lot of cases that some of the technologies that people use, I'm gonna call out maybe, if you look at something like Office 365, which a lot of companies use, they have a feature in there that allows an MSP to manage all of the Office 365 accounts from one global admin. So you can actually go in there and click in and say, okay, now I'm in your account. Now I'm in this company's account. Now I'm in this company, and they can manage that. Now, recently, last year, they finally said, hey, wait a minute, we should enforce two-factor authentication on these global accounts. But before that wasn't enforced. You could actually have a password with a weak password that had access to 50 or 100 clients or thousands of clients, Office 365, which is their email. And once you get access to somebody's email, the world is your oyster. We know that. Once you get in there, you can do anything at that point. So, so I think that, when it comes to what to ask, so I think that's actually a really good takeaway if you guys are actually open for it, and we'll do that, is, let's come back after, and supplement this show with a, we'll add it in the chat after, we'll put a link to it, but let's create a list of, let's say 5-10 questions, say, this is what you ask your MSPs or your vendor. I think we can even make this even more generic to say, what do we ask your vendor? And here's some takeaway checklists that you can do to actually help you, because you don't know what to ask them. So we'll give that to you. We'll help you out, and you can just keep refining that as you go.
And sometimes you can also apply, overlapping security control through multiple providers. Right? I work from an MSSP, and we don't do MSP. We don't touch IT. So we basically, as a security provider, ask the question that they ask to their IT to make sure that this is in place. So typically, MFA, access control, audit trail, and stuff. These are the questions that we ask the customer. They don't know, they have to ask their IT. And most of the time, this is triggering an action, because either they did it right or they start to think about it. So, overlapping security control, making sure that one is checking on another. And that's also a good approach. And it doesn't have to be crazy expensive either. It's like taking a consultant or VCs or hours kind of to help, just asking the right questions.
Okay. So I know we're over the hour. So I think, one thing that, we had one more question that we wanted to touch on was term and conditions. So I'll bring that up. And I think, Alex, if you want to just quickly just touch on this, I know it's it's another large topic, but just quickly, how do people verify T&Cs? Because this comes down to liability. And if you don't read them, you're liable. But who is liable? Who's at fault? Whose responsibility is it? So, just very quick, if you give us just a couple minutes to dig into that.
First of all, you should read them. If you subscribe to any contract and you are in charge, you are the person who signed it, you must read it or have your legal counsel sign and review it. That's one thing. Second thing, if you are a service provider and you sign, let's say, for AWS or Azure or whatever, there are specified in the term and condition that you must inform the end user, the end customer, about these conditions. Because when you provide the service, you store their data on this service. Therefore, the term and condition that you agreed with, the end user must agree with it as well. So they must transfer that stuff. And we barely see that. So when you sign for something, you must read and review. This is to keep it quick, because this is something very quick. And the last point on that is when you get an email from your provider that say, hey, we made our term and conditions super more easy to read for you. There's just a little chance about enhancing your privacy. Sadly, you need to review the whole thing and analyze the difference between the previous one and the new one to know exactly what changed. So the legal counsel should do that. And if you're a very small company, sadly, you will have to read what's new. Because otherwise, awesome. You just agreed with that. So you agreed with something, and sometimes it's giving away your private data.
Yeah. So, awesome, guys. So obviously we're getting a bit over time, and so so I want to kind of come back to the first question here, and I think we'll end the show. That the whole show, the whole premise here was talking about supply chain and the fact that many people don't even know they even have one to even do the other things that we just talked about. So so I think to close with the show, I think we'll start with Eran again. We'll let you go first here to talk about what are the next best steps? What can people do to really minimize and reduce the risks in their supply chain?
Well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that you have it, and there is something there. Your software is not just popping up on the cloud. Someone is building it, storing it, and all that. So first and foremost, as a company, you need to understand it and saying, I need to understand my process and make sure it's secure. And I need to look at least at one level down to my suppliers and saying, hey, what is the access that I'm giving them to my facilities, my network, and my data, and how are they keeping it safe? This is the only thing that you need to do. And if each one will do it to his suppliers, slowly, we will cover the chain. And I think it should start from the big, the banks, the financial services organization that have more power on their suppliers, and they will start to educate the market and demand some best practices and some minimum security measures applies to be a supplier of this bank, or so I will use your solution as part of my processes. And this is the way to start educating the market. You're on mute, I think.
Alex, closing thoughts for me.
What?
Closing thoughts, man.
I agree. No. It's a complex topic. It's good to raise awareness on that. When the thing is, when we take the data of people, we take responsibility and there is accountability. This is something that we lost sight with the cloud thing, thinking that transferring the risk to a provider was the easy way. We sign and it's over. I think this is something that must come back to the table. We need accountability. That's one of my daily fights. Because if there is accountability, there will be due care. You must care. You take the data. You are in charge of it, And, it's not because you're far away that I can complain. A whole time when we were seeing people, we could claim and say, I don't agree with you. Now, you just get a phone line saying, we will take care of your call. Your money is very valuable to us. Just wait a few minutes. and then, the agreement basically state that if the provider fail in any way, the only thing that you can back is a percentage of the monthly amount you pay. Yeah. So basically, there is no accountability for them. So that's something I'm fighting to get back on the table, because it's not acceptable that everybody can get out of careless attitude without any impact on that. So because if there is nothing bad that can happen, no one will care. I mean, this is easy. I don't care. I just subscribe to that thing. Just cheap. So awesome. That would be it.
Thanks, man. Okay, Rod, closing thoughts.
Just to add to what Alexander was saying is that the push back to the consumer of accountability for everything, even though the service provider is providing the service, is a thing that we have to change. Right? They always say, well, you can configure it however you want. Amazon, Google, everything, right? And when it breaks, it's you. But closing thoughts in general is just the question you got to ask your suppliers is what suppliers and vendors are they using to supply the service to you? It's an easy question. If they can't answer it and they can't list the 10 or 20 or 5 or 10 suppliers that they're using to supply services to you and how those suppliers are handling your data, then you can't do business with them. Right. And it's not, that's an easy question to ask, right? You're going to do business with VARs. Okay. Alexander, tell me what suppliers you're using to supply these services to me. Right. And how are you making them accountable, and how are you handling them as a security service provider to you? Right. If that starts to cause stuttering or consternation or I got to get back to you, you have a problem.
Well said. Beautifully said.
Transparency.
Yep.
This is also Brad? Why we avoid white labeling. Go ahead, Bart. Sorry.
Yeah. Take it away, Brad. Close out the show.
And I would say, make no mistake, right? What we do on the internet is core to your business. Period. End of story. Right? It doesn't matter whether you're a commercial entity, a state, or government entity. Right? In the end, right, you are going to do business on the internet, and so it is imperative to understand those supply chains, because at some point. And we've seen it with Kaseya, we've seen it with Solarwinds, we've seen it with Microsoft as of late, right? Every supply chain can be, and at some point will be breached, and it's going to impact you or your customers directly. So you've got to take that into account right now and understand that, so you can help to manage not only your risk, but to better protect your customers.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you, taking the time as always to come and chat with everybody and provide the value that you do. Eran, obviously staying up late.
Yep. Thanks, Eran.
Coming a long ways away.
you,
I
sir.
really appreciate that. Thank you all. And we will, like you said, there was an action item that we actually left today as well. Is we'll come up with a list of action items, of questions that you can actually use that you can ask your MSPs, vendors in general. We'll make it as general as we can to say this will actually help you and give you a checklist that you can actually go and get some value out of and make this a little easier on yourselves, because it is complex. Like we said, due diligence is not easy. So we'll help you out a little bit as best we can. Anyway, again, this was a Dash of Cyber. We will see you all next month. Thank you for tuning in today.
Thanks, Eran.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.